I sent one text message to our family group chat at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. After 52 years in this house, I think it's time for me to find my own place. What do you think? By Thursday morning, I had sold everything I owned and booked a one-way ticket to Dubai. But let me tell you how we got there. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The house on Maplewood Drive in Riverside had been my home since 1971. 52 years of birthday parties in the backyard, Christmas mornings by the fireplace, and countless family dinners around the oak table my late husband Garrett had built with his own hands. The wallpaper in the kitchen still bore the pencil marks where we'd measured our 3 children's height year after year. Nora, now 48, Caleb, 45, and little Jasmine, who wasn't so little anymore, at 42. Garrett had passed 2 years ago after a brief but brutal battle with pancreatic cancer. The funeral was everything he would have wanted: simple, heartfelt, surrounded by people who truly knew him. But what came after was something neither of us had prepared for. The loneliness wasn't just about missing him, though that ache never fully went away. It was about realizing that the home we'd built together had become a museum of memories that only I was left to curate. The house was too big for one person. 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a basement filled with decades of accumulated life, and a garden that Garrett had lovingly tended but that I could barely manage. The heating bills alone were eating into my fixed income faster than I cared to calculate. My Social Security and Garrett's pension were enough to get by, but just barely. Every month felt like walking a tightrope between dignity and desperation. But it wasn't just the financial strain. It was the weight of maintaining a life that had been designed for 4 people when there was only 1 left. The dining room table that seated 8, but where I ate my meals alone. The master bedroom with 2 nightstands, though only one held a book and a glass of water. The front porch swing where Garrett and I used to watch the sunset, now occupied only by me and the ghosts of conversations we'd never have again. My children had their own lives, their own mortgages, their own problems. Nora lived 3 hours away in Charleston with her husband Derek and their twin boys, both starting high school. Between Derek's law practice and the boys' endless activities, she barely had time to breathe, let alone worry about her widowed mother rattling around in an oversized house. When she did call, it was usually hurried conversations squeezed between soccer practice and parent-teacher conferences. Caleb had moved to Portland for his tech job right after college and never really came back. He visited twice a year, Christmas and my birthday, staying just long enough to feel like a good son before disappearing back into his world of startups and stock options. He meant well, but he viewed every conversation through the lens of problem solving, as if my grief and loneliness were bugs in a code that just needed the right algorithm to fix. Jasmine, my youngest, lived closest, just 45 minutes away in downtown Richmond. She was the artist of the family, running a small pottery studio and teaching ceramics classes to make ends meet. Of all my children, she understood loss the most deeply. She'd been through her own divorce 3 years earlier and knew what it felt like to rebuild a life from scratch. But she was also the one struggling most financially, still paying off student loans and trying to keep her studio afloat. I didn't want to be a burden. That was the thing none of them seemed to understand. I didn't want to be the problem they had to solve, the obligation they had to manage, the guilt that kept them awake at night. I'd spent 52 years being the strong one, the one who held everything together, the one everyone could count on. I wasn't ready to flip that script to become the dependent parent who needed managing. But the isolation was killing me slowly, like carbon monoxide, invisible but deadly. Days would go by where the only human voice I heard was the cashier at the grocery store saying, "Paper or plastic?" I'd started talking to Garrett's photograph on the mantle, having full conversations about the weather, the neighbors, the declining state of the flower beds. The mailman probably thought I was losing my mind the way I'd rush to the door just to have 30 seconds of human interaction. The house held too many memories, but it also held too much responsibility. The leaky faucet in the bathroom that Garrett would have fixed in 10 minutes, but that required me to call a plumber and spend $200. The gutters that needed cleaning, the driveway that needed resealing, the furnace that made strange noises I didn't recognize. Every small maintenance issue felt like a mountain when you're climbing it alone. My neighbors, God bless them, tried to help when they could. Mrs. Patterson from next door would bring over casseroles and invite me to her book club. The Hendersons across the street always offered to include me in their weekend barbecues. But there's a difference between kindness and belonging, between being welcomed and being home. I was grateful for their gestures, but I also knew I was the widow they felt sorry for, the project that made them feel better about themselves. Late at night, when the house creaked and settled around me like old bones, I'd lie in that too-big bed and wonder what the point was. Not in a dark way. I wasn't ready to give up on life. But I wondered what the point was of maintaining this elaborate stage set for a play that had already ended. What was I preserving, and for whom? That's when the idea first started forming. Quietly at first, then with growing insistence. What if I didn't have to preserve anything? What if I could start over? What if at 74 years old, I could choose adventure over obligation, possibility over preservation? The thought should have terrified me. Instead, for the first time in 2 years, it made me feel alive. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. So, I crafted that text message carefully. Not desperate, not demanding, just honest. After 52 years in this house, I think it's time for me to find my own place. What do you think? I'd been thinking about it for months, actually. Not just thinking, researching. I'd looked into senior living communities in Riverside, toured a few assisted living facilities, even browsed apartment listings for one-bedroom places that might suit a woman my age. The numbers were daunting, but not impossible. If I sold the house on Maplewood Drive, there would be enough equity to buy something smaller and still have money left over for my remaining years. But this wasn't just a financial decision. It was about admitting that this chapter of my life, the chapter where I was the mother who hosted Thanksgiving, the grandmother whose house was command central for family gatherings, the keeper of family traditions and photo albums, was coming to an end. That's not an easy thing to accept when you're 74 and still feel like you have life left to live. I sent the message to our group family chat, the one that Jasmine had set up 3 years ago that we'd optimistically named the Hartley Crew. It included me, all 3 kids, and their spouses when they remembered to add them. Usually it was just logistics. Who's bringing what to Christmas dinner, reminders about birthdays, the occasional funny meme that Caleb would share from whatever tech conference he was attending. I thought they'd want to discuss it. Maybe we'd have a phone call. Or better yet, they'd drive down for the weekend and we'd sit around the kitchen table like we used to, weighing pros and cons, looking at options together. I imagine Nora pulling up real estate websites on her laptop, Caleb running numbers on some spreadsheet he'd create, Jasmine sketching out floor plans for how I could arrange furniture in a smaller space. I thought they'd ask questions. What kind of place was I considering? Did I want to stay in Riverside or move closer to one of them? Had I talked to a realtor yet? What was my timeline? Did I need help with the logistics of downsizing 52 years of accumulated belongings? Most of all, I thought they'd ask how I was feeling about it. Because this wasn't just about real estate. This was about their childhood home. This was about the place where they'd taken their first steps, lost their first teeth, brought their report cards and prom dates, and later their own children to visit grandparents. This was about closing the door on the physical space that had held their entire family history. I expected some pushback, honestly. Maybe Nora would get sentimental and suggest we wait a little longer. Maybe Caleb would offer to help with the maintenance issues instead.
Maybe Jasmine would propose some creative solution I hadn't considered. I was prepared for that conversation, ready to explain my reasoning, eager to have them help me think it through. What I wasn't prepared for was silence. The message showed as delivered at 11:47 p.m. I know because I stared at my phone for the next hour, watching for those three little dots that would indicate someone was typing a response. Nothing. I told myself they were all asleep, that I'd hear from them in the morning. Morning came. Still nothing. By noon, I started to worry that something was wrong with the group chat. I sent a follow-up message saying, "Did everyone see my text from last night? Just want to make sure it went through." That one showed as read by all three of them within an hour, but still no responses. Wednesday evening, I called Nora directly. Derek answered. "Oh, hey, Ruth," he said, and I could hear the twins arguing about something in the background. "Nora's at back-to-school night. Won't be home until late. Everything okay?"
I sent a message to the family chat about the house, I said. Just wanted to get everyone's thoughts. Yeah, she mentioned that. Listen, Ruth, it's been crazy here with the start of the school year. Can she call you back this weekend? This weekend? My question about potentially selling my home of 52 years could wait until the weekend? Thursday, I tried Caleb. Straight to voicemail. His recording said he was in meetings all week for some product launch and would return calls as soon as possible. I didn't leave a message. What would I say? "Hi, honey. Just wondering if you have any feelings about me selling your childhood home?" Jasmine was my last hope. She'd always been the most emotionally available of my children, the one most likely to understand that this decision wasn't just about square footage and mortgage payments. I drove to her studio Thursday afternoon, something I rarely did because I didn't want to interrupt her work. She was at the pottery wheel when I walked in, her hands covered in clay, completely absorbed in shaping what looked like a large bowl. She glanced up when she heard the bell in the door. "Mom, what a nice surprise! I'm just finishing up here. Give me 5 minutes?" I nodded and wandered around her studio while she worked. The space was small, but filled with her beautiful creations, bowls and vases and decorative pieces and earth tones that somehow managed to be both rustic and elegant. A few customers browsed the display shelves, and I felt that familiar surge of pride in my youngest daughter's talent. "Okay," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "What brings you by?" "Did you see my message in the group chat about the house?" Her face changed slightly, became more careful. "Yeah, I saw it." "And?" She was quiet for a moment, focusing intently on cleaning clay from under her fingernails. "Mom, are you sure you've thought this through? I mean, that house is your whole life, and the market is crazy right now. You might not get what it's worth." "I've been thinking about it for months, honey. The place is too big for me, and the upkeep is—" "But where would you go? Those senior places are so expensive, and most of them are just warehouses for old people waiting to die." Old people waiting to die. That's how she saw it. That's how they all saw it, I realized. Not as a new chapter, but as the beginning of the end. They wanted me to keep being who I'd always been, the stable center around which their lives orbited, even if that stability was slowly killing me. That night, I sat in Garrett's chair with my laptop and started researching in earnest. Not senior living facilities in Riverside, not assisted living communities with their patronizing activities and shared dining rooms. I started looking at something else entirely. Something that would show them just how serious I was about finding my own place. Friday morning brought the responses I'd been waiting for, and they were worse than the silence. Nora's message arrived at 6:23 a.m., clearly typed in a hurry between getting the twins ready for school and rushing out the door herself. "Mom, we talked about this. You're being dramatic. The house is fine. You just need to get out more. Maybe join a book club or something. This is just grief talking." Just grief talking. As if 2 years wasn't enough time to know the difference between mourning my husband and recognizing that my life needed to change. As if my 52 years of living in that house, of maintaining it, of knowing every creaky floorboard and drafty window counted for nothing compared to her weekend visits twice a year. Caleb's response came 20 minutes later, and I could practically hear his efficiency-obsessed brain working through the keyboard.
Makes no financial sense right now. Property values are at an all-time high, but so are interest rates. You lose money on transaction costs and taxes. Keep the house. Hire a cleaning service if you need help. I can set up a monthly transfer to cover it. A cleaning service. As if dust on the furniture was the problem. As if I could hire someone to fill the silence, to laugh at my stories, to care whether I made it through another day. And that casual offer to set up a monthly transfer, the tech bro solution to everything. Throw money at it and make it someone else's problem to manage.
But Jasmine's response was the one that broke something inside me. It came at lunchtime, and I could picture her in her studio, taking a break from her pottery wheel to deliver what she probably thought was loving guidance. "Mom, I'm worried about you. This whole idea sounds like a cry for help. Maybe you should talk to someone. Dr. Mitchell could probably recommend a good therapist who specializes in grief counseling. Moving won't solve the loneliness. It'll just make you lonely in a different place. We love you, but you're not thinking clearly right now." Not thinking clearly? My youngest daughter, the one I thought understood me best, had just dismissed my carefully considered decision as mental instability. She'd reduced my desire for independence to a psychological problem that needed professional intervention. The woman who taught her to think for herself, to trust her own instincts, to be brave enough to follow her dreams, even when everyone else said she couldn't make a living as an artist, that same daughter was now telling me I wasn't capable of knowing my own mind. I sat in the kitchen, reading those 3 messages over and over, feeling something shift inside my chest. Not the sharp pain of fresh grief, but something colder and more permanent. The realization that your children see you not as a person, but as a function. Not as Ruth Hartley, a woman with her own needs and desires and dreams, but as Mom, a fixed entity whose job was to remain stable and available and unchanging until they were ready to put me in a nursing home themselves. None of them had asked what kind of place I was considering. None of them had offered to help me look at options. None of them had acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, I knew what I needed better than they did. Instead, I got, "You're being dramatic. It makes no financial sense, and you need therapy." The group chat went quiet again after that, as if they'd fulfilled their obligation by responding and could now return to their real lives. But I kept staring at those messages, dissecting each word, understanding finally that this wasn't about the house at all. This was about control. This was about them needing me to stay exactly where I was so they could continue to take me for granted without feeling guilty about it. Saturday morning, I called Dr. Mitchell myself. Not for therapy, for the physical I'd been putting off. While I was there, I asked him about my health, my life expectancy, my capability of living independently. "Ruth, you're in better shape than most people 20 years younger," he said, reviewing my chart. "Your blood pressure is excellent, your cholesterol is under control, you're mentally sharp as a tack. Why do you ask?" "My children think I'm not capable of making my own decisions about where to live." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Your children are idiots. You could probably outlive all of them. What are you thinking of doing?" I told him about wanting to downsize, maybe move somewhere new. I didn't mention the research I'd been doing the night before, the websites I'd been browsing, the crazy idea that had been growing stronger with each dismissive response from my family. "Good for you," he said. "Life's too short to spend it maintaining a museum to everyone else's memories. You want my medical opinion? You need adventure, not therapy." Adventure? When was the last time someone had suggested I needed adventure instead of supervision? That afternoon, I poured myself a glass of Garrett's good scotch, the bottle we'd been saving for special occasions that never came, and I opened my laptop. Not to look at senior living facilities or assisted living communities or any of the age-appropriate options my children expected me to consider. I opened the website I'd bookmarked the night before, the one that had kept me awake until 3 a.m., scrolling through photos that looked like they belonged in a travel magazine, not a real estate listing. Dubai. I know how it sounds. A 74-year-old widow from Virginia considering a move to the United Arab Emirates sounds like the setup for either a comedy or a cautionary tale.
But I'd been reading about it for weeks now, ever since I'd stumbled across an article about retirees choosing unconventional destinations. The more I learned, the more sense it made. Dubai had one of the world's best healthcare systems. The cost of living, despite its luxury reputation, was actually lower than most major American cities when you factored in no income tax and subsidized utilities. The expat community was huge and welcoming, full of people who'd made similar leaps of faith. The weather was warm all year round, no more brutal Virginia winters that kept me trapped indoors for months. But more than the practical benefits, Dubai represented something my children's responses had made crystal clear I needed: distance. Not just physical distance, but psychological distance from people who saw me as a problem to be managed instead of a person to be respected. I sat in the weekend reading those 3 messages over and over, feeling something shift inside my chest. Not the sharp pain of fresh grief, but something colder and more permanent. The realization that your children see you not as a person, but as a function. Not as Ruth Hartley, a woman with her own needs and desires and dreams, but as Mom, a fixed entity whose job was to remain stable and available and unchanging until they were ready to put me in a nursing home themselves. None of them had asked what kind of place I was considering. None of them had offered to help me look at options. None of them had acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, I knew what I needed better than they did. Instead, I got, "You're being dramatic. It makes no financial sense, and you need therapy."
By Sunday night, I'd filled a notebook with information and bookmarked dozens of websites. I'd even found a real estate agent who specialized in helping American retirees relocate to the Gulf states. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she'd moved to Dubai herself 15 years ago after her divorce. The hardest part, she'd written in one of her blog posts, isn't the logistics of moving internationally. It's accepting that the people who claim to love you most are often the ones most invested in keeping you small. Keeping you small. That phrase echoed in my head as I closed the laptop and prepared for bed. Is that what my children were doing? Keeping me small so they could continue to think of themselves as the center of the universe, with me as the reliable supporting character who never changed, never grew, never needed anything they weren't prepared to give? Monday morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to send another message to the group chat. I wasn't going to call and try to convince them that my feelings were valid or my reasoning was sound. I wasn't going to waste energy trying to get approval from people who'd already made it clear they weren't interested in what I actually needed. Instead, I was going to show them exactly how serious I was about finding my own place. I picked up the phone and dialed Patricia Chen's Dubai number. "Patricia, this is Ruth Hartley calling from Virginia. I saw your website about helping American retirees relocate to Dubai. I'd like to schedule a consultation. How soon can we start?" Patricia Chen's voice was warm and professional when she answered on the second ring, despite the 12-hour time difference. It was 9 a.m. in Riverside, which meant it was 9 p.m. in Dubai, late enough that she could have ignored the call, but she didn't. "Ruth, how wonderful to hear from you. I was just having my evening coffee on my balcony overlooking the marina. Tell me, what's drawing you to consider Dubai?" I found myself talking for 20 minutes straight, something I hadn't done in months. I told her about the house, about Garrett, about my children's responses to my simple request for family discussion. I told her about the loneliness and the isolation and the growing certainty that I was disappearing into the role everyone expected me to play, the grieving widow who would quietly fade into the background until it was time for assisted living. "You know," Patricia said, when I finally paused for breath, "I hear this story more often than you might think. Not the specific details, but the pattern. Adult children who love their parents in theory, but can't see them as independent adults with their own needs and dreams. It's especially difficult for women your age because society has trained everyone, including your own kids, to see you as past the point of adventure." Is that what this is? Adventure? Ruth, let me ask you something. When you imagine waking up in your house on Maplewood Drive 5 years from now, how do you feel?
The question hit me like a physical blow. I closed my eyes and tried to picture it. Me at 79, still maintaining that big empty house, still waiting for phone calls from children too busy to visit, still preserving a shrine to a life that had already ended. The image was suffocating. Trapped, I said quietly. I feel trapped. And when you imagine waking up in a bright apartment overlooking Dubai Creek, maybe heading down for coffee with other expats, maybe taking an art class or exploring the Gold Souk, how do you feel? This time the image came easily, vividly. Sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, the sound of water and city life beyond, a calendar full of choices instead of obligations, a life measured by experiences, not maintenance tasks. Alive, I whispered. I feel alive. Then you have your answer. After we hung up, I sat in Garrett's chair staring at nothing, feeling something crystallize inside my chest. For 52 years, I had lived my life in reference to other people, first as a wife, making decisions based on what was best for Garrett and our marriage, then as a mother, structuring everything around what the children needed. Even now, 2 years after Garrett's death, I was still making choices based on what my adult children expected rather than what I wanted. When was the last time I had asked myself what I wanted? Not what was practical, not what was expected, not what would make everyone else comfortable, but what would make me happy. The answer was disturbing. I couldn't remember. I walked through the house that night, seeing it differently. Not as the home where I'd raised my family, but as the cage where I had slowly disappeared. Every room held memories of the person I used to be before I became just mom and then widow. The piano in the living room where I used to play before I decided the children's activities were more important than my music lessons. The sunroom where I used to paint watercolors before I converted it into a playroom and never converted it back. The cookbook collection gathering dust because cooking for one felt pointless.
In the bedroom I'd shared with Garrett, I opened the closet and really looked at my clothes for the first time in years. When had everything become beige and navy blue? When had I stopped wearing the bright colors that used to make me feel confident and beautiful? I pulled out a red dress I'd bought for our wedding anniversary dinner 3 years ago, the last time I'd felt like a woman instead of just a caregiver. It still had tags on it. We'd never made it to that dinner. Garrett had been diagnosed 2 weeks before our anniversary, and suddenly everything became about appointments and treatments and managing his care. I held that red dress against my body and looked in the mirror. And for a moment, I saw her, the woman I used to be, the woman who had dreams beyond being useful to other people, the woman who deserved to make choices based on her own happiness. That's when I understood something that changed everything. My children didn't want me to stay in Riverside because they loved me. They wanted me to stay because it was convenient. They wanted to be able to check the box marked good child without actually having to invest time or emotional energy in understanding who I was becoming in this new phase of my life. As long as I stayed exactly where I'd always been, they could continue to take me for granted without feeling guilty about their neglect. But there is something else, something deeper and more painful. They genuinely couldn't see me as anything other than their mother. They couldn't imagine that I might have interests and desires that had nothing to do with them. They couldn't conceive of me as a woman who might want adventure, who might crave new experiences, who might be capable of building a completely different kind of life. And maybe that was partly my fault. Maybe I'd been so good at being what everyone needed that I'd forgotten how to be what I wanted. Maybe I'd been so committed to selfless motherhood that I'd erased myself in the process. Tuesday morning, I called my financial advisor. Robert Donnelly had been managing my money for 15 years, first when Garrett was alive and then through the complicated process of settling his estate. He knew me as conservative, cautious, the kind of client who preferred CDs to stocks and worried about every market fluctuation. "Ruth, good to hear from you. How can I help?" "Robert,
I need to know exactly how much money I'd have if I sold the house and liquidated all my investments. Silence. Then, are you thinking of moving to a senior community? Because there are some excellent facilities right there in Richmond that wouldn't require you to sell everything. Everyone assumed they knew what I was thinking. Everyone assumed they understood my options better than I did. Just run the numbers for me, Robert. Pretend I'm moving to, I don't know, Europe. What would I have to work with? Europe? His voice climbed an octave. Ruth, are you feeling all right? Maybe you should talk to Nora before making any big decisions. Robert. My voice was sharper than I intended. I'm 74 years old, not 7. I don't need my daughter's permission to ask my financial advisor to do his job. Can you run those numbers or not? 20 minutes later, I had my answer. Even after taxes and selling costs, even after paying off the tiny remaining mortgage balance, I'd have enough money to buy a nice apartment in Dubai, live comfortably for the rest of my life, and still leave a substantial inheritance to my children. But Ruth, moving internationally at your age, the tax implications alone are complicated. And what about your health care, your support system? What if something happens? What if something happens? The question that had been used to limit women's choices for generations. What if something happens to you, so you'd better stay small, stay safe, stay where we can keep an eye on you? Robert, what if something happens and I've wasted the last good years of my life maintaining a museum to other people's memories instead of making new ones of my own? He didn't have an answer for that. Tuesday morning, I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I drove to the mall and bought new clothes. Not sensible clothes, not age-appropriate clothes, but clothes that made me feel beautiful. A flowing blue dress that reminded me of ocean water, a silk scarf in sunset colors, sandals with actual heels. I got my hair cut and styled instead of just trimmed. I bought lipstick in a shade called Adventure Red. The woman looking back at me in the department store mirror was someone I'd almost forgotten existed. Someone confident and vibrant and ready for whatever came next. That evening, I sat on my front porch swing, wearing my new blue dress and adventure red lipstick, feeling more myself than I had in years. Mrs. Patterson from next door waved from her garden.
Ruth, you look absolutely lovely tonight. Special occasion? Yes, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I'm celebrating the rest of my life. I knew then that I was done asking for permission, done seeking approval, done trying to convince people who'd already decided I was incapable of knowing my own mind. My children had made their position clear. They wanted me to stay exactly where I was, doing exactly what I'd always done until I wasn't their problem anymore. But I was done being anyone's problem. I was ready to be someone's adventure, my own. Thursday morning, I called Patricia Chen back. Patricia, it's Ruth. I've made my decision. How quickly can we make this happen? Patricia's response was immediate and energizing. Ruth, I love your decisiveness. Most people spend months agonizing over this decision. Let me send you some apartment listings that I think would be perfect for you, and we can schedule a video tour for this weekend. How does that sound? It sounds perfect, I said, and meant it. But first, I had something else to handle. The family group chat was still sitting there on my phone, those 3 dismissive messages from my children like small bombs that had gone off in my carefully ordered world. I could write a long explanation, defend my choice, try to make them understand why their responses had hurt so deeply. I could guilt them about their lack of support, lecture them about respecting their mother's autonomy, demand the apology I deserved. Instead, I typed 4 words. I appreciate the input. That was it. No anger, no wounded feelings, no dramatic declarations. Just a simple acknowledgement that I had heard them, followed by silence. I didn't tell them what I decided. I didn't ask for their blessing or their help. I didn't try to convince them or educate them or make them feel bad about their responses. Because here's what I'd learned in my 74 years on this planet. You can't argue people into caring about you the way you deserve to be cared about. You can't logic someone into seeing you as a complete person if they're determined to see you as just a function, and you certainly can't convince someone to support your dreams if they're invested in keeping you small. The most powerful thing I could do wasn't to fight with them, it was to stop fighting for their approval altogether. I put my phone in a drawer and left it there for the rest of the day. No checking for responses, no analyzing their silence, no waiting for them to suddenly transform into the supportive family I'd always hoped they could be. Instead, I spent the afternoon doing something I hadn't done in years, planning for my own happiness. Patricia had sent apartment listings, and I spread them out across my kitchen table like treasure maps. A 2-bedroom with a balcony overlooking the Marina Walk, a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows in the heart of downtown, a cozy place in Jumeirah Lakes Towers with its own private garden terrace. Each one represented possibility, adventure, the chance to wake up somewhere that existed for my joy rather than everyone else's convenience. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, and asked her if she'd like to come over for tea. Margaret had always been kind to me, but we'd never been particularly close, just friendly neighbors who waved from our respective driveways and made small talk about the weather. But something about my new clarity made me want to connect with the people who had shown me genuine warmth, even if it was just the basic kindness of one human being to another. "Ruth, what a lovely surprise! You look absolutely radiant today. There's something different about you." We sat in my sunroom with proper tea service, the good china I'd been saving for special occasions that never came. I told her about Dubai, not defensively, not seeking approval, but sharing my excitement with someone who might understand what it meant to choose adventure over safety. "My goodness," Margaret said, setting down her teacup with a delicate clink. "Dubai! How absolutely marvelous! I've always wanted to travel more, but Harold was such a homebody. After he passed, everyone kept telling me it was too late to start, but you're proving them wrong, aren't you?" "It's never too late to start," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "We just tell ourselves it is because it's easier than admitting we're afraid." "And your children? What do they think?" I paused, considering how to answer honestly without sounding bitter. "They think I need therapy," I said finally, and we both laughed. "Oh, my dear," Margaret said, "if wanting to live your own life at 74 requires therapy, then half the women in this neighborhood need to be institutionalized. Good for you for not letting them talk you out of it." After she left, I realized how good it felt to have someone respond with excitement rather than concern, with encouragement rather than warnings. It reminded me that not everyone in the world was invested in keeping me small and safe and predictable. Some people understood that adventure was exactly what a life well lived required.
Friday morning, I made a list. Not a pros and cons list about Dubai. I was past that. This was an action list. Things that needed to happen to make my new life possible. Contact a realtor about selling the house. Research international shipping companies. Schedule a physical with Dr. Mitchell to get medical records in order. Apply for my retirement visa. Book a reconnaissance trip to Dubai to see apartments in person. Each item on that list felt like freedom. I was halfway through researching real estate agents when my phone rang. Nora. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I wanted to—" "Which conversation?" I interrupted gently. "The one where you told me I was being dramatic, or the one where you said I wasn't thinking clearly?" Silence. Then, I didn't mean it like that. I just think you're making a big decision during a difficult time, and maybe—" "Nora," I said, and my voice was calm, steady, final. "I asked for your thoughts about me finding a new place to live. You gave them to me. I heard you. But I'm going to make my own decision about my own life." "But Mom, we're just worried about you." "I know you are, and I appreciate that you care. But worrying about me and actually supporting me are two different things. You've chosen worry. I've chosen action." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm 74 years old, not 7. It means I'm capable of making my own choices. And it means I'm not going to spend whatever years I have left trying to convince people who should already know better that I deserve to be treated as a competent adult. Another silence. Then, are you angry with us? The question surprised me because the answer surprised me. No, I said, and realized I meant it. I'm not angry. I'm just done asking for permission I don't need from people who aren't going to give it anyway. After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not the hollow peace of resignation, but the solid peace of decision. I wasn't angry at my children because anger required me to keep caring about their approval. I wasn't hurt by their dismissiveness because I'd stopped expecting them to be different than they were. I was simply, finally, free to live my own life. That evening, I video called Patricia for the apartment tour. My laptop screen filled with images of sparkling city lights, modern furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto balconies overlooking the Persian Gulf. Patricia walked me through 3 different apartments, each one beautiful in its own way, each one representing a completely different life than the one I had been living. The Marina apartment has the best sunset views, but the downtown unit puts you right in the heart of everything: restaurants, shopping, cultural events. I could hear the wonder in my own voice. When was the last time I'd had to choose between 3 beautiful options instead of just trying to manage problems? Ruth, can I ask you something? Patricia's voice was gentle. You seem so certain about this move, but most people have moments of doubt. Are you sure you're ready for such a big change? I thought about my response carefully. Patricia, I've spent 54 years being married and 52 years living in the same house. I've been someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's responsibility for my entire adult life. I have maybe 20 good years left, if I'm lucky. I refuse to spend them being afraid of my own choices. Then let's make this happen, she said with a smile that I could see even through the computer screen. I'll prepare the paperwork for the downtown apartment. It's perfect for someone ready to embrace everything the city has to offer. When can you see it in person? How about next month? I said, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess them. I'll book a flight this weekend. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room, surrounded by 52 years of accumulated life, and felt absolutely no regret. Just excitement. Just possibility. Just the thrilling certainty that the best part of my story was about to begin. My phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. Mom, Nora said you hung up on her. Can we talk? I looked at the message for a long moment, then powered off the phone without responding. I was done explaining myself to people who had already decided I was incapable of knowing my own mind. I had a flight to book and a new life to plan. What my children didn't know, what they had never bothered to discover in all their years of treating me like a fragile museum piece, was that I'd been quietly building a life beyond their narrow view of who they thought I was. It started with my book club, the one Nora had so dismissively suggested I join, as if reading with other women was some kind of therapeutic busy work for lonely widows. What she didn't know was that I'd been a founding member of the Riverside Literary Society for over a decade. We weren't just a group of bored housewives discussing romance novels over tea and cookies. We were 15 intelligent, well-read women who met twice a month to tackle everything from contemporary fiction to political biographies to philosophy.
And more importantly, we'd become friends. Real friends, not just acquaintances who waved from across the grocery store. These were women who knew my thoughts on everything from Virginia Woolf to the current state of American politics. They knew I'd majored in English literature before marriage and motherhood redirected my life. They knew I'd once written poetry that had been published in small literary magazines. They knew me as Ruth, not just as someone's mother or widow.
When I arrived at our Thursday evening meeting, carrying a plate of my famous lemon bars and wearing my new blue dress, the response was immediate. "Ruth Hartley, you look absolutely gorgeous," called out Sandra Williams, our unofficial group leader and a retired high school principal who'd never minced words in her life. "What's the occasion?" I waited until we'd finished our discussion of The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, ironically appropriate given my own plans for reinvention, and then I told them. Not sheepishly, not apologetically, but with the excitement I'd been bottling up for days. "I'm moving to Dubai." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before the room erupted, not with concern or warnings or suggestions that I needed therapy, but with genuine excitement and a dozen rapid-fire questions. "Dubai? How fabulous. When do you leave? Where will you live? Can we come visit? Ruth, this is the most exciting thing anyone in this group has done in years." Caroline Martinez, a former travel writer who'd moved to Riverside after her husband's retirement, was practically bouncing in her chair. "I've been to Dubai 3 times for magazine assignments. It's absolutely incredible. The culture, the architecture, the food scene, you're going to love it." "But what about your children?" asked Helen Park, ever the practical one. "Are they supportive?" I paused, considering how to answer honestly without turning this into a therapy session about family dysfunction. I said, "They think I need professional help," I said finally. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before the room erupted. Not with concern or warnings or suggestions that I needed therapy, but with genuine excitement and a dozen rapid-fire questions. Well, if wanting to live your best life at 74 requires professional help, then we're all certifiably insane. Helen, didn't you just book that singles cruise to Alaska? And Carolyn, aren't you planning to spend 3 months in Tuscany learning to paint? "That's different," Helen protested. "Those are vacations." "No," said Margaret Chen, no relation to Patricia, but equally sharp. "Those are life choices. Ruth is just making a bigger one. Good for her." What happened next was something I hadn't expected, something that revealed just how much support had been quietly surrounding me while I'd been focused on the absence of it from my family. These women, these friends I saw twice a month and occasionally ran into at the farmer's market, rallied around me with the kind of practical, enthusiastic support my own children couldn't muster. Caroline immediately pulled out her phone. "I still have contacts at the Dubai Tourism Board. Let me get you connected with the expat community there. There's a whole network of American women, and they're incredibly welcoming." Sandra was already taking notes. "What do you need help with? Packing? Selling the house? I have a realtor friend who specializes in quick sales, and my daughter-in-law is an estate sale organizer." Helen, despite her initial concern, was warming to the idea. "My son works in international finance. He can help you understand the banking requirements for overseas residents." Within an hour, I had a list of contacts, offers of practical help, and 3 women volunteering to help me sort through 52 years of belongings when the time came. But more than that, I had validation. These women, these intelligent, accomplished women who lived full lives and weren't afraid of adventure, thought my plan was not only reasonable, but admirable. "Ruth," said Margaret as we were packing up to leave, "I hope you know how brave you're being. Most of us spend our whole lives talking about the things we'd do if we were braver. You're actually doing them." Driving home that night, I realized something profound. I wasn't alone. I'd thought I was, sitting in that big empty house, waiting for children who were too busy to call. But I'd been surrounded by friendship and support all along. I'd just been looking in the wrong direction. My phone had 17 missed calls when I got home. 7 from Nora, 4 from Caleb, 3 from Jasmine, and 3 from numbers I didn't recognize but suspected belonged to their spouses. I didn't listen to any of the voicemails. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and called Patricia in Dubai. "Ruth, perfect timing. I just got off the phone with the landlord of the downtown apartment. He's agreed to hold it for you until after your visit next month. And he's willing to negotiate on the lease terms since you're planning a long-term stay." "Patricia, can I ask you something? How did you know you were ready to make such a big move?" "That's easy," she said with a laugh. "When the people who claimed to know what was best for me had never bothered to find out what I actually wanted.
when staying felt like dying slowly and leaving felt like finally coming alive. The accuracy of that description took my breath away.
Ruth, are you having second thoughts? No, I said, and I was surprised by how quickly and firmly the word came out. No second thoughts. Just appreciation. For the first time in months, I feel like I'm not alone in this. You're not alone. That's what I tried to tell you in our first conversation. There's a whole world of people out here who understand that adventure doesn't have an expiration date. After we hung up, I finally listened to one voicemail. Nora's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Mom, we need to talk. This has gone far enough. We're coming down this weekend whether you want us to or not. We can't let you make this mistake. This mistake. As if choosing joy over obligation was an error in judgment that required intervention. I deleted the message and called Sandra. Sandra, it's Ruth. I hope I'm not calling too late, but I wanted you to know I'm booking my flight to Dubai tomorrow, and I wanted to ask if you'd be my emergency contact while I'm gone. Of course, honey. But Ruth, are you okay? You sound different. I'm better than okay, I said, looking around my living room at all the family photos, the carefully preserved memories, the shrine to a life that had been beautiful but was over. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And where's that? On the edge of something wonderful. Friday morning, I did 3 things that would have been unimaginable to me just a week earlier. I booked a first-class ticket to Dubai, departing the following Tuesday. I called the most successful realtor in Riverside and scheduled an appointment to list my house. And I changed my phone number. The new number went to exactly 4 people: Dr. Mitchell, Patricia in Dubai, Sandra from book club, and my financial advisor, Robert. Everyone else, including my children, would have to earn their way back into my life by treating me with the respect I'd finally learned to demand. By noon, I was standing in my bedroom closet holding the red dress I'd never worn, and for the first time since Garrett's death, I was planning an outfit for joy instead of obligation. I was going to wear that dress to dinner my first night in Dubai, in a restaurant overlooking the Persian Gulf, celebrating the fact that it's never too late to choose yourself. My doorbell rang at 2 p.m. I looked through the peephole and saw Nora's car in the driveway, all 3 of my children standing on my front porch, looking like an intervention committee. I smiled, checked my lipstick in the hall mirror, and opened the door. "Good afternoon to you two," I said mildly, closing the door behind them. "I assume you're here about Dubai?" Dubai? Caleb's voice cracked like he was going through puberty again. "Mom, please tell us that's not serious. Please tell us you haven't actually booked anything." I looked at my 3 children standing in my living room, the room where I'd read them bedtime stories, helped them with homework, celebrated their achievements, comforted them through heartbreaks. They looked like strangers. Worse than strangers, they looked like people who'd never bothered to meet the woman who lived inside their mother. "I've booked my flight," I said calmly. "I leave Tuesday." The explosion was immediate and predictable. All 3 of them talking at once, voices rising, words tumbling over each other in their desperation to make me see reason. "Mom, this is insane. You can't just move to the Middle East." "What about your doctor? Your medications? What if something happens?" "You don't speak Arabic." "The culture's completely different. You've never even been there." I let them exhaust themselves, standing quietly in the center of their storm, feeling oddly peaceful. This was exactly what I had expected. This was exactly why I'd stopped trying to have conversations with them about my life. When the noise finally died down, I walked to my kitchen and put the kettle on for tea. "Would anyone like some refreshments?" I asked, as if they'd drop by for a pleasant social visit rather than an ambush. "Mom, we're not here for tea," Jasmine said, her artist sensitivity apparently not extending to reading the room. "We're here because we're worried sick about you. This Dubai thing, it's not normal." "Define normal," I said, spooning tea leaves into my good china pot. "Normal, like staying in a house that's too big for me? Spending my remaining years maintaining a museum to your childhood memories?
Normal like sitting alone every night, waiting for phone calls that don't come. That kind of normal? That's not fair, Nora protested. We call? You call when you need something, or when guilt finally overrides your busy schedules. That's not the same as caring about my actual life.
Caleb pulled out his phone, of course he did, and started scrolling through what I assumed were statistics about crime rates or healthcare systems or whatever data he thought would convince me I was making a mistake. Mom, do you have any idea what the expatriate failure rate is for people over 65? Most people come back within 2 years, financially and emotionally devastated. Most people, I said, pouring hot water over the tea leaves, don't spend 2 years planning their move or researching every aspect of their new life. Most people don't have the financial resources I have or the support system I've built. Support system? Jasmine laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Mom, you don't know anyone in Dubai. I know Patricia Chen, my realtor who's become a friend. I know the expat community she's connected me with. I know Carolyn Martinez has given me contacts at the American Women's Association. I know Helen Park's son is helping me set up international banking. I know Sandra Williams has connected me with her friend who's also an American retiree living in the Gulf region. The silence that followed was different from their usual dismissive quiet. This was the silence of people realizing they'd been operating with incomplete information. Who are these people? Nora asked slowly. They're my friends, my real friends. The women from my book club who've known me as Ruth, not just as your mother. The people who were excited when I told them about Dubai instead of treating me like I'd lost my mind. Your book club? Caleb was staring at me like I'd announced I was secretly a CIA operative. Since when do you have a book club? Since 12 years ago. We meet twice a month. We read everything from literary fiction to political biographies. Last month, we discussed Tara Westover's Educated, and next month, we're tackling The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. I'm also the treasurer, and I organize our annual fundraiser for the local literacy program. My children were looking at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language, which, in a way, I had. The language of a woman who existed beyond their limited understanding of who I was supposed to be. Mom, Jasmine said carefully, we didn't know. No, you didn't know, because you never asked. You know me as someone who makes your favorite cookies when you visit and remembers your birthdays and listens to your problems when you call. You don't know me as someone who has her own interests, her own friendships, her own dreams. The kettle whistled, breaking the tension. I poured my tea, added a slice of lemon, and sat down at my kitchen table. The same table where I'd served them countless meals, helped them with homework, listened to their teenage dramas. I need you to understand something, I said, my voice quiet but clear. I'm not running away from anything. I'm running toward something, toward adventure, toward new experiences, toward the possibility that my 70s might be the best decade of my life instead of just the waiting room for death. But why Dubai? Nora asked. And for the first time, her voice held genuine curiosity instead of judgment. I told them about the research I'd done, about the healthcare system and the expat community and the cultural opportunities. I told them about the financial advantages and the weather and the proximity to Europe and Asia for travel I'd always dreamed of but never prioritized. I told them about Patricia and the beautiful apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the marina. But most importantly, I told them about waking up every morning in Riverside feeling like I was disappearing a little more each day, and how the possibility of Dubai made me feel alive again. I spent 54 years putting other people's needs before my own. First your father's, then yours. I don't regret that. It was what I chose, and you were worth it. But my job as your mother isn't to preserve myself in amber for your convenience. My job was to raise you to be independent adults who could thrive without needing me to stay exactly the same forever. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd said with the same analytical approach he brought to his tech problems. The financial planning makes sense, he admitted grudgingly. And the healthcare system in the UAE is actually world-class. You researched it? I was surprised. I research everything. It's what I do. He looked almost embarrassed. I wanted to find reasons why it was a bad idea, but honestly, the numbers all work in your favor. Jasmine was crying quietly, tears streaming down her face. I'm scared, she whispered. What if something happens to you and you're so far away? Sweetheart, what if something happens to me here and I've wasted my last good years being afraid to live them? That evening, after they'd finally left, not convinced but at least no longer talking about interventions, I did something that surprised even me. I called the local newspaper. Riverside Gazette, this is Tom Mitchell. Hello, Tom. My name is Ruth Hartley, and I have a story I think your readers might find interesting. I'm a 74-year-old widow who's selling everything and moving to Dubai. And I'd like to talk about why that is exactly what more people my age should consider doing.
The interview was scheduled for Monday morning, the day before my departure. Tom Mitchell turned out to be a young man in his 30s who'd moved to Riverside from Richmond to cover local news for the small regional paper. He arrived at my house with a photographer and a genuine curiosity about what would drive someone my age to make such a dramatic life change. Mrs. Hartley, what inspired this move? My children told me I needed therapy when I asked them to help me think through downsizing options, I said with a smile. That's when I realized I needed to stop asking for permission to live my own life. The article ran Tuesday morning, the day of my departure, with the headline, "Local Widow Trades Virginia Suburbs for Dubai Adventure." The photo showed me standing in my empty living room, wearing my red dress and adventure red lipstick, holding my passport and plane ticket, smiling like a woman who'd just won the lottery. By the time my flight took off that afternoon, the story had been picked up by 3 other regional papers and shared hundreds of times on social media. My phone, the new number that only 4 people had, buzzed with interview requests from podcasts and lifestyle blogs. I turned it off as we reached cruising altitude and looked out the window at Virginia disappearing below me. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward, toward the lights of a city that didn't know me as anyone's mother or widow or obligation. I was just Ruth, finally ready to find out who that could be. I didn't see the aftermath immediately, of course. I was 35,000 feet above the Atlantic, sipping champagne in first class and reading a guidebook about Dubai's art district. But Sandra called me during my layover in London to fill me in on what I'd left behind. "Ruth, honey, you need to know what's happening back here. That newspaper article has gone absolutely viral. The Riverside Gazette's website crashed from traffic, and I've had 3 reporters call me asking for comment about your inspiring journey. But that's not the interesting part." "What's the interesting part?" I asked, settling into a corner of the airport lounge with my phone. "Your children are in full damage control mode, and it's not going well for them." Apparently, the trouble started within hours of the article going live. Someone, Sandra suspected it was Caroline from book club who had a mischievous streak, shared the article on Facebook with the caption, "This is what it looks like when you choose adventure over other people's expectations. Go, Ruth." Within 6 hours, it had been shared over 200 times by people in our community. But it wasn't just the celebratory shares that were causing problems for Nora, Caleb, and Jasmine. It was the comments. "Someone who knows your family commented," Sandra continued, barely containing her amusement. "They said something like, 'I hope her children are proud of her courage.' And then other people started asking where her children were during all this planning, why she was making such a big move alone." I could picture it perfectly. The small-town gossip mill that had always operated at low speed suddenly accelerating, fueled by social media and the inherent drama of my story. And my children, who'd spent years taking credit for having such a strong, independent mother when it was convenient, suddenly finding themselves under scrutiny for their lack of support. Nora posted something on her own Facebook page, a long thing about how families sometimes disagree but always love each other, and how she's learning to support her mother's journey even when it scares her, very carefully worded to make herself look supportive after the fact. And Caleb? Oh, he's been busy. Apparently, he called the newspaper trying to get them to run a follow-up story about the importance of family input in major life decisions for seniors. Tom Mitchell told him where he could stick his follow-up story. I laughed to spite myself. Young Tom Mitchell had struck me as someone with integrity, and apparently I'd been right. But Jasmine's response is the most interesting. Sandra continued. She posted a long Instagram story, those picture things that disappear after a day, talking about how proud she is of her mother's brave decision and how the family is so excited to support this new chapter. Complete revisionist history, but she's selling it hard. By the time I landed in Dubai, the situation back home had escalated beyond anything I could have anticipated. Patricia met me at the airport with a bottle of champagne and a tablet full of news stories. "Ruth, you're famous," she said, giving me a hug like we'd been friends for years instead of phone acquaintances. "Look at this. You've been featured in 3 lifestyle blogs, 2 retirement planning websites, and something called Adventures After 60. The comments are incredible." She was right. Hundreds of people were sharing their own stories of family members who discouraged their dreams, of adult children who treated aging parents like incompetent children, and the courage it takes to choose yourself after a lifetime of choosing others. I was apparently the face of a movement I had no idea existed.
But the real entertainment was happening in my old group chat, which Sandra had thoughtfully screenshotted for me before I left. The chat I'd abandoned in days earlier was suddenly active again. But now it was just my 3 children talking to each other in increasingly panicked tones. "Did you see what Derek's mother posted? She said she wishes her children supported her dreams the way Ruth's family obviously supports hers. How do I respond to that?" I'm getting questions at work about why we let Mom move to Dubai alone. My boss asked if we were going to visit her. I had to pretend we'd been planning this together all along. Jasmine, the pottery studio is getting calls from reporters wanting to interview the daughter of the inspiring Dubai adventurer. What am I supposed to say? That we tried to talk her out of it? Caleb, we need to get ahead of this. I think we should plan a visit soon, get some photos of us supporting her, maybe do our own interview about how proud we are. Nora, should we have stayed more in touch with her planning? People are asking why she moved so far away when she has family here. Jasmine, maybe we should have been more supportive from the beginning. I'm starting to think we might have been wrong about this. The most revealing exchange came later that evening, Riverside time. Caleb, I ran the numbers on her Dubai move. She's actually going to be better off financially than staying in the house. Lower cost of living, no property taxes, better healthcare coverage. I might have been wrong about the economics. Nora, Derek's been researching Dubai since the article came out. Apparently, it's one of the safest cities in the world for women, especially expat women. The healthcare system is better than ours. He's asking why we weren't more supportive. Jasmine, I looked up her pottery studio. Did you know Mom has been treasurer for 8 years and organized their charity fundraiser that's raised over $50,000 for literacy programs? How did we not know this? The crescendo came when someone from Nora's high school alumni group shared the article with the comment, "Remember Ruth Hartley? She was president of our Mothers Club for 6 years and organized the scholarship fund that's still going strong. She was always the one who got things done while the rest of us just talked about them. So proud to see her living her best life." Within hours, my children were facing an uncomfortable truth. The community that had watched me raise them, volunteer at their schools, organize fundraisers, and coordinate activities for decades, saw me as capable, admirable, and deserving of support. Their response to my Dubai plans was starting to look less like loving concern and more like selfish convenience. The tipping point came when Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor, was interviewed by a local TV station that had picked up the story. She stood in her garden. Just visible in the background was the "sold" sign on my former property, and delivered what Sandra later described as the most diplomatic character assassination I've ever witnessed. Ruth Hartley is one of the most competent, intelligent, well-organized people I've ever known. She spent 52 years taking care of everyone else. If she wants to spend her golden years taking care of herself in one of the most beautiful cities, well, good for her. I just hope her family realizes what an amazing woman they have before it's too late. If she wants to spend her golden years taking care of herself before it's too late. The implication was clear to anyone with functioning social awareness.
Ruth's family had not been properly appreciating or supporting this amazing woman, and they were in danger of losing her entirely. By my third day in Dubai, I was getting apologetic messages on my new phone number from all three children. The tone was markedly different from their intervention attempt the week before. Nora: Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I owe you an apology. You were right that I didn't really listen to your reasons or understand how much planning you'd done. I'm proud of you for being so brave. Caleb: I've been doing more research on Dubai, and I have to admit, you made a smart financial decision. I'm sorry I questioned your judgment. You've always been better at life planning than any of us. Jasmine: Mom, I saw the interview with Mrs. Patterson, and it made me realize I haven't been seeing you as the strong, independent woman you've always been. I was treating you like you needed protection when what you needed was support. I'm sorry. But the message that told me everything I needed to know about their sudden change of heart came from Caleb. Mom, I keep getting asked at work when we're visiting you in Dubai. Should I book flights for all of us to come for Christmas? Maybe we could do a family photo there for our holiday cards. A family photo in Dubai for their holiday cards. Not because they wanted to see me, not because they were genuinely excited about my new life, but because having a worldly, adventurous mother had suddenly become a social asset instead of a source of embarrassment.
I was sitting on my new balcony overlooking Dubai Marina, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, when I realized something that made me smile. They hadn't changed their minds about me. They'd changed their minds about how my choices reflected on them. But the damage was done. Not to me. I was exactly where I wanted to be, surrounded by new possibilities and genuine support. The damage was to their carefully constructed image of themselves as good, caring children. The community that had raised them was politely but clearly questioning their behavior, and they were scrambling to rewrite history. I took a sip of the excellent Lebanese wine I'd discovered at a nearby restaurant and opened my laptop to respond to interview requests from 3 different podcasts. I had a story to tell, and apparently the world was ready to hear it. My children could work on their own stories. I was busy living mine. 3 weeks into my Dubai adventure, I received a call that changed everything. Not from my children. I'd been politely deflecting their increasingly desperate attempts to insert themselves into my narrative, but from a producer at a national morning show called Second Chapter Stories. Mrs. Hartley? This is Rebecca Martinez from Second Chapter Stories. We feature people who've reinvented their lives after major transitions. Your story has been shared in our Facebook group over 1,000 times, and we'd love to have you on the show. I was sitting in a cafe in the Gold Souk, having just finished my 3rd Arabic lesson and feeling ridiculously proud that I could now order coffee and ask for directions in my new language. The idea of national television felt surreal. What would you want me to talk about? Everything. The decision-making process, your family's reaction, how you found the courage to make such a dramatic change at 74, and what advice you'd give to other people who feel stuck in lives that no longer fit them. That evening, I called Sandra to talk through the opportunity. Her response was immediate and enthusiastic. Ruth, you have to do this. Do you know how many women our age are trapped in situations they hate because they're afraid of what people will think? You could be the permission they need to choose themselves. The interview was scheduled for the following week, live from Dubai via satellite. I spent the days leading up to it not preparing talking points or worrying about how I'd look on camera, but living the life I'd come here to build. I joined a ceramics class taught by a British expat who'd moved to Dubai 20 years earlier. I attended a lecture at the Emirates Literature Foundation about Middle Eastern women writers. I had dinner with 3 American women I'd met through Patricia, all of whom had stories of family resistance to their international moves. The thing is, said Margaret, a former nurse from Ohio who'd moved to Dubai 5 years earlier, they don't want you to succeed because then they have to examine their own choices. If you can be happy living adventurously at our age, what's their excuse for playing it safe? When the morning of the interview arrived, I felt surprisingly calm. I chose my outfit carefully, not the conservative blazer I might have worn trying to placate my children's concerns, but a flowing turquoise dress I'd bought at the Mall of the Emirates, paired with a delicate gold necklace I'd found in the souks. I looked like a woman who belonged in her new life. The host, Maria Santos, was warm and genuinely curious. The interview began with basic questions about the logistics of international moving, but quickly moved into deeper territory. Ruth, tell us about the moment you decided this wasn't just a fantasy, but something you were actually going to do. It was when I realized I'd been asking the wrong people for permission to live my own life. I was asking my adult children to validate my choices instead of trusting my own judgment. When you've spent 74 years on this planet, when you've raised 3 successful children and managed a household and contributed to your community for decades, you don't need anyone's permission to decide what makes you happy. What was your family's initial reaction? I paused, considering how to answer honestly without being cruel. They were concerned. They suggested I might need therapy for wanting to leave the house where I had lived for 52 years. They couldn't understand that staying in that house felt like preserving a museum to a life that had already ended. How do you respond to people who say this kind of move is irresponsible at your age? This was the question I'd been hoping for, the one that let me address the ageism that had colored every conversation about my decision. I'd ask them to define irresponsible, I said, leaning forward slightly. Is irresponsible moving to a city with better health care than what I had in Virginia? Is irresponsible to reduce my living expenses by 30% while improving my quality of life? Is irresponsible to learn new languages, explore new cultures, and challenge myself intellectually and physically every day? Or is the irresponsible thing spending your remaining good years maintaining a life that no longer serves you because other people expect you to? Maria smiled. You sound like you have no regrets.
None. But I do have advice for anyone watching this who feels stuck in a life that doesn't fit them anymore. I looked directly into the camera again, thinking of all the messages I'd been receiving from women who felt trapped by others' expectations. Stop asking for permission you don't need. Stop trying to convince people who benefit from your unhappiness that you deserve to be happy. And stop using other people's fears as an excuse not to pursue your own dreams. The interview lasted 20 minutes, but the response was immediate and overwhelming. The show's Facebook page was flooded with comments from viewers sharing their own stories of family members who'd discouraged their dreams, of feeling trapped by others' expectations, of being inspired to make their own changes. But the most significant response came from someone I hadn't expected. 2 days after the interview aired, I received an email with the subject line, "From your daughter-in-law." It was from Derek's wife, Melissa, Nora's sister-in-law, whom I barely knew despite years of family gatherings. "Dear Ruth," it began, "I watched your interview yesterday, and I wanted you to know how much it meant to me. I've been struggling with the way my family reacted to my decision to go back to school for my master's degree at 43. My husband and in-laws keep asking who's going to manage the household, who's going to be available for the boys' activities, whether I'm having some kind of midlife crisis. Watching you speak so confidently about choosing your own happiness made me realize I don't need their approval to pursue my education. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like." The email continued with details about her graduate program in environmental science, her dream of working in conservation, and her newfound determination to stop apologizing for having ambitions beyond carpools and casseroles. She ended with a request that surprised me. "Would you be willing to talk to Nora about this? I think she needs to hear from you about the difference between supporting someone and trying to control them." That evening, I called Nora for the first time since I'd left Virginia. Not to respond to her increasingly frantic attempts to reestablish contact, but because I had something specific to say. "Mom," she answered on the first ring, her voice tight with relief and anxiety. "Thank God. We've been trying to reach you. I know. I needed some space to settle into my new life before dealing with family dynamics, but I'm calling about Melissa." The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "She wrote to you?" Nora's voice was small. "She did. And I want you to understand something, Nora. The way you and your brothers responded to my Dubai plans, the dismissiveness, the assumptions about my competence, the attempts to control my choices, that's how you're treating Melissa's decision to go back to school for her master's degree at 43. You're doing to her exactly what you tried to do to me. That's different. No, it isn't. She's a 43-year-old woman with a bachelor's degree and 20 years of life experience. She doesn't need your approval to pursue her education any more than I needed yours to move to Dubai. But instead of supporting her dreams, you're creating obstacles and expressing disapproval. I could hear Nora crying softly on the other end of the line. I don't know how to be supportive when I'm scared, she whispered. Then that's what you need to work on. Because fear-based parenting doesn't stop when your children become adults, and it doesn't stop when you become the adult. You're so afraid of things changing that you're trying to control everyone around you instead of trusting them to make good decisions. I thought I was protecting you. You thought you were protecting yourself from having to deal with your own feelings about change. There's a difference. The conversation continued for another hour, with Nora gradually acknowledging how her need for control had affected not just me, but her relationship with Derek, her children, and even her friends. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, perhaps ever. Mom, she said as we were ending the call, I watched your interview. You looked radiant. I haven't seen you look that happy since before Dad got sick. That's because I am happy, sweetheart. For the first time in years, I'm living my life instead of just maintaining it. Would it be okay if I came to visit? Not to check on you or convince you to come home, but because I want to see this life you've built. I want to understand what I was so afraid of. I looked out at my balcony view of the marina, at the lights beginning to twinkle as the sun set over the Persian Gulf, at the life I'd built from nothing but courage and stubbornness. I'd like that, I said, but only if you're coming to celebrate with me, not to worry about me. I'm ready to celebrate, she said, and for the first time in our conversation, I believed her. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my balcony, thinking about the strange power of truth-telling. The interview hadn't just given me a platform to share my story, it had forced my family to confront their own patterns of behavior in ways that private conversations never could.
Sometimes you don't change people's minds by arguing with them. You change their minds by living so authentically that they can no longer avoid seeing the truth. The morning show interview had been viewed over 2 million times within a week. But what started as a simple story about one woman's move to Dubai had become something much larger, a movement of people sharing their own stories of breaking free from others' limitations. My inbox was flooded with messages that broke my heart and filled it simultaneously. A 68-year-old man from Montana who'd always dreamed of opening a woodworking shop, but whose adult sons kept insisting he was too old to start a business. A 59-year-old woman from Florida whose family had talked her out of returning to college, claiming she was being selfish for wanting to pursue her degree when she should be enjoying retirement. A 71-year-old grandmother from Oregon whose children had convinced her to sell her beloved cottage because it was too much work, only to realize they wanted the inheritance money more than her happiness. Each message was a variation on the same theme. People who'd internalized others' fears as their own limitations, who'd accepted that reaching a certain age meant accepting a smaller life, who'd been taught that wanting more was somehow inappropriate or ungrateful. But it wasn't just individuals reaching out. Organizations began contacting me as well. AARP wanted to feature my story in their magazine. A retirement planning company asked me to speak at their annual conference. 3 different universities invited me to lecture on reinvention in later life. A documentary filmmaker wanted to follow me for 6 months to capture the real story of international relocation for older adults. The most unexpected contact came from Dr. Amanda Foster, a gerontologist at Johns Hopkins who was researching what she called liberation narratives, stories of people who'd broken free from age-based expectations to create fulfilling later life chapters. Ruth, your story represents something we're seeing more and more, but that mainstream culture isn't quite ready to acknowledge yet,
she told me during our video call. There's a growing population of older adults who refuse to accept that their lives should contract as they age. But the pushback they get from family members often has less to do with genuine concern and more to do with disrupting established family systems. What do you mean? When a parent stops being predictably available, stops prioritizing their children's convenience over their own happiness, it forces the entire family to restructure. Your children weren't just worried about your safety in Dubai, they were worried about losing their reliable, unchanging mother figure. Her words crystallized something I'd been sensing but couldn't articulate. My move hadn't just been about finding a new home. It had been about reclaiming my right to be a complete person, rather than just a supporting character in my children's lives. Dr. Foster's research was groundbreaking, but what excited her most was the potential for real-world impact. Would you be interested in co-creating something? A platform where people could share these liberation stories and find support for making their own courageous choices? Within a month, we'd launched Second Chapter Courage, a website and online community for people over 50 who were ready to prioritize their own dreams. I wrote the first blog post titled The Permission You Don't Need, sharing the full story of my Dubai journey and the lessons I'd learned about choosing yourself after a lifetime of choosing others. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, we had over 500 members sharing their stories. Within a week, that number had grown to 3,000. People weren't just sharing their dreams, they were taking action. A retired teacher started the food truck business she'd always wanted. A widower began the cross-country motorcycle trip his late wife had encouraged him to take. A grandmother enrolled in art school, despite her daughter's protest about wasting money at her age. But the story that moved me most came from a woman named Patricia. Not my Dubai realtor, but another Patricia, 73 years old and living in Wisconsin. She'd been a caregiver for her husband through 10 years of Alzheimer's disease. After he passed, her adult children expected her to move into a senior community near one of them, to remain available for babysitting and holiday hosting. Instead, inspired by my story, she sold her house and bought an RV, not for weekend camping trips, but for full-time travel across America, visiting national parks she dreamed of seeing for decades. Your story gave me permission to admit that I'd spent 10 years being a caregiver, and 50 years before that being everyone else's go-to person. I love my children, but I realized I'd forgotten how to love myself. Now I wake up every morning in a different place, and for the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I want to be. Her children's initial response was familiar: concern about her safety, questions about her mental state, attempts to convince her she was making a mistake. But Patricia had learned from watching my journey. Instead of trying to convince them, she simply sent them photos from each new destination, postcards sharing her adventures, video calls from the rim of the Grand Canyon and the beaches of California.
After 6 months, she wrote in a follow-up message, my daughter called and said, Mom, I've never heard you sound so happy. I'm sorry we didn't support this from the beginning. My son wants to meet me in Yellowstone next month to travel with me for a week. They finally understand that supporting my dreams doesn't diminish their place in my life. It enhances it. The community we'd built was becoming something unprecedented, a place where people could share their liberation stories without judgment, find practical advice for making dramatic life changes, and most importantly, receive the encouragement they weren't getting from their families. Local news stations began picking up stories of community members taking courageous leaps. The woman who'd started the food truck business was featured in her hometown paper. The man who'd opened the woodworking shop was interviewed by a business journal about entrepreneurship after 65. The grandmother in art school had her paintings featured in a gallery show titled Never Too Late, Art After 70. But the most powerful stories were the quiet ones. The messages I received from people who'd finally found the courage to have honest conversations with their families about their own needs and dreams. One message particularly stood out, from a woman named Helen whose situation mirrored mine in heartbreaking detail. Ruth,
I'm 69 and have been living in the same small town my entire life. My husband passed 3 years ago, and my adult children expect me to be content with bridge club and babysitting grandchildren. But I've always wanted to live by the ocean. I found a perfect little cottage in Maine that I can afford with the proceeds from selling my house. When I mentioned it to my kids, they reacted exactly like yours did. Concerns about my mental state, suggestions that I need therapy, insistence that I'm being impractical. But reading your story and joining this community has shown me something important. I don't need their permission to pursue my own happiness. I'm putting my house on the market next month, and I'm moving to Maine. If they want to be part of this next chapter of my life, they're welcome. If they want to keep treating me like an incompetent child, they can do that from a distance. For the first time in years, I feel alive. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. Sitting in my Dubai apartment, 6 months after my arrival, reading messages like Helen's, I realized that my story had stopped being just about me. It had become a catalyst for something much larger, a movement of people refusing to accept that aging meant accepting less. The ripple effects kept expanding. Adult children who'd initially resisted their parents' adventurous choices were beginning to see those choices as inspiring rather than concerning. Grandchildren were writing essays about their cool grandmas who'd chosen adventure over safety. Retirement communities were beginning to offer programs on reinvention planning rather than just transition management. Dr. Foster called it a cultural shift, but I thought of it more simply. People were finally giving themselves permission to want more from life, regardless of what anyone else thought they should want. And the most beautiful part was that it wasn't just about dramatic moves like mine. People were finding courage for smaller acts of self-determination, too. Taking art classes their spouses thought were silly, joining hiking groups despite their children's safety concerns, dating again despite their family's discomfort, pursuing hobbies they'd abandoned decades earlier for more practical concerns. The community had taught me something I hadn't expected to learn. My story wasn't unique because of what I'd done. It was powerful because of how many other people recognized themselves in it. How many people had been waiting for permission to choose themselves and how ready they were to take that permission once they saw it was possible. As I prepared for bed that night, looking out at the lights of Dubai Marina, I thought about all the other women and men across the world who were looking out their own windows, planning their own adventures, choosing their own happiness for the first time in decades. We were creating something together, a new narrative about what it meant to age with purpose and joy rather than resignation and limitation. And it was just the beginning. 8 months after arriving in Dubai, I was standing in a conference room at the Emirates Palace Hotel, looking out at 200 faces, men and women aged 50 to 85, who had traveled from across the Gulf region, Europe, and North America for the first ever Second Chapter Courage International Conference. What had started as a simple website and online community had grown into something none of us had anticipated. We weren't just sharing stories anymore. We were creating resources, building networks, and fundamentally changing how people thought about aging and autonomy. Dr. Foster stood at the podium presenting research that would have seemed impossible a year ago. What we've discovered through the Second Chapter Courage community is that family resistance to older adults' adventurous choices follows predictable patterns, but so does the transformation that occurs when those choices are successfully implemented. Ruth Hartley's story wasn't an anomaly. It was a preview of a demographic shift we're seeing worldwide.
She clicked to her next slide, showing data that made the audience murmur with recognition. 67% of our community members report that family opposition decreased significantly within 6 months of implementing their life changes. 83% report improved family relationships within 1 year. And perhaps most importantly, 91% report that they wish they had made their changes sooner. I watched the faces in the audience as she spoke, seeing my own journey reflected in their expressions, the initial doubt giving way to recognition, then to determination.
These weren't reckless people seeking attention or having midlife crises. These were thoughtful adults who had realized that the script society handed them for their later years didn't match their actual capabilities or desires. When Dr. Foster introduced me, I walked to the podium feeling the weight of responsibility that came with becoming an accidental spokesperson for a movement, but also feeling the deep satisfaction of knowing that my personal choice to prioritize my own happiness had created space for others to do the same. 18 months ago, I began. I was a 73-year-old widow living alone in a house that felt like a mausoleum, trying to convince my adult children that I was capable of making my own decisions about my living situation. Today, I'm standing in Dubai, having built a life that brings me joy every single day, speaking to 200 people who refuse to accept that aging means accepting less. I told them about the practical realities of international relocation at my age, the paperwork, the cultural adjustments, the moments of doubt. But I also told them about the unexpected discoveries, the Arabic language classes that had become a weekly social highlight, the art gallery openings where I'd met fascinating people from dozens of countries, the cooking classes where I'd learned to make dishes I'd never heard of before moving here. But the most important thing I've learned, I said, is that when you stop asking for permission to live your own life, you don't just change your circumstances, you change your relationships. The people who truly love you will find a way to support your happiness, even if it scares them at first. And the people who can't support your happiness will reveal that their love was conditional on your compliance. After the formal presentations, I spent hours in informal conversations with attendees. Their stories were as varied as their accents and ages, but the themes were remarkably consistent. Margaret, a 70-year-old former librarian from London, had sold her flat and moved to a small village in Tuscany to study Italian cooking and ceramics. "My daughter was horrified," she said with a laugh. "She kept asking what would happen if I got sick, who would take care of me. Now she visits twice a year and posts photos of my ceramics on her Instagram account. She tells her friends about her adventurous mom like it was her idea all along." James, a 68-year-old retired engineer from Toronto, had bought a sailboat and was living marina to marina throughout the Mediterranean. "My son thought I'd lost my mind, said I was being selfish, abandoning my responsibilities as a grandfather. But when he finally visited me in Greece last month and saw how healthy and happy I was, how sharp and engaged sailing keeps me, he apologized. He's bringing the grandkids to meet me in Spain next summer." The pattern was so consistent, it might have seemed rehearsed, except for the genuine emotion in every telling. Initial family resistance, followed by persistence and boundary setting from the older adult, eventually leading to family acceptance and often admiration. But it wasn't just personal transformation we were discussing. The community had evolved into something with real social impact. Working with Dr. Foster and a team of volunteers, we'd developed resources that were being used by counselors, financial planners, and retirement coaches worldwide. Our Family Conversation Toolkit provided scripts for older adults to use when discussing major life changes with resistant family members. The Adventure Planning Workbook helped people research and plan international moves, career changes, or other major transitions. Most importantly, our Support Network Directory connected people with others who'd made similar changes, creating mentorship relationships that were proving invaluable. The conference had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Representatives from 3 different governments were there to learn about supporting older adult immigration and expatriate services. 2 major retirement planning companies were interested in partnering with us to offer adventure-focused financial guidance. A publisher wanted to turn our community stories into a book series. But the moment that crystallized the transformation for me came during the final day's panel discussion on redefining family support. Nora was there. She'd flown in from Virginia specifically for the conference, not as my daughter, but as a participant interested in understanding how families could better support older adults' economy. She sat in the third row, taking notes like any other attendee, and when it came time for audience questions, she raised her hand. "My name is Nora, and my mother started this community after I told her she needed therapy for wanting to move to Dubai." The audience laughed, but kindly. "I'm here because I want to understand how I became the kind of person who thought loving someone meant controlling their choices, and how other families can avoid making the same mistakes."
The honesty of her question, the courage it took to essentially confess her failures in front of 200 strangers, moved me more than any private apology could have. This wasn't performative repair. This was genuine growth. Dr. Foster fielded the question with characteristic insight. Family members often resist their older adults' adventurous choices because they've been taught that love means protection, and protection means preventing risk. But what we're learning is that the biggest risk for many older adults isn't physical danger from new adventures, it's the psychological danger of living a diminished life. After the formal sessions ended, Nora and I walked along Dubai Marina together, past the restaurants and cafes that had become my neighborhood, past the building where I'd taken Arabic lessons, and the gallery where I'd bought my first piece of local art. "I never asked you what made you happy," she said, as we sat at a waterfront cafe watching the sunset. "In all those years of worrying about what was safe or practical or appropriate, I never once asked what would make you happy. You were raised to think that mothers exist to make their children happy, not the other way around," I said gently. "I didn't model asking for what I wanted, so you never learned to support someone else's wants. But I should have known better. I should have seen that you were disappearing into the caretaker role and helped you find your way back to yourself. Maybe, or maybe this was exactly how it needed to happen. Maybe I needed to get to the point where I was willing to choose myself, even without your blessing. And maybe you needed to see the consequences of trying to control someone you love." That evening, the conference concluded with a commitment ceremony. Not legally binding, but emotionally significant. Participants stood up one by one to publicly commit to specific changes they would make in their lives, with the community as witnesses and supporters. Some commitments were dramatic: selling houses, moving to new countries, starting businesses. Others were quieter, but equally courageous: setting boundaries with controlling adult children, pursuing artistic interests they'd abandoned, dating again after years of widowhood. When my turn came, I stood and looked out at faces that had become familiar over 3 days of intense conversation and connection. "I commit," I said, "to never again apologizing for choosing my own happiness. And I commit to helping others find the courage to make that same choice." The applause that followed wasn't just appreciation, it was recognition. We had built something together that was bigger than any individual story. We had created proof that it's never too late to author a new chapter of your life, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is show them what courage looks like. As people began to leave, making plans to stay in touch and visit each other in their new adventures, I realized that what we'd built would outlast all of us. The second chapter Courage Community had become a living testament to the fact that aging doesn't have to mean accepting less. It can mean choosing more. 2 years after sending that simple text message about finding my own place, I woke up on my 76th birthday in my Dubai apartment to the sound of multiple phones buzzing with messages. Not the desperate, concerned messages I'd received during those first chaotic weeks, but genuine birthday wishes from around the world. Nora had sent a video of her twins singing happy birthday in Arabic, a language they'd started studying because, as 13-year-olds, they thought having a grandmother who lived in Dubai was incredibly cool.
Caleb had shared a photo of his daughter's school project about inspiring grandparents, featuring a poster board covered with pictures of me at various Dubai landmarks. Jasmine's message included a link to a pottery piece she'd made, inspired by the ceramics I'd shown her during her visit last spring, the first time she'd incorporated Middle Eastern design elements into her work. But the message that meant the most came from an unexpected source. Derek, Nora's husband, whom I'd barely known despite 15 years of family gatherings. Ruth, his message read, I wanted you to know that watching how you handled the criticism and followed your dreams anyway has changed how I parent the boys. When they want to try something that scares me, I remember you getting on that plane to Dubai, and I try to offer support instead of fear. Thank you for showing our family what courage looks like. I made my morning coffee, a blend I'd discovered at a local roastery run by a French expat who'd moved to Dubai for the same reasons I had, and walked out onto my balcony. The marina was already bustling with activity. Early morning joggers along the waterfront, sailing boats heading out for day trips, the familiar sounds of a city that had somehow become home in ways that Maplewood Drive never quite had, even after 52 years. My phone rang. Sandra from the book club, calling for our weekly catch-up. Happy birthday, world traveler! What's the plan for the celebration?
Dinner with my Dubai book club tonight. We're discussing The Seven Moons of Malali Almeida, and then Patricia is taking me to see a traditional Emirati dance performance at the Cultural Center. Tomorrow, I'm flying to Rome to meet James from the conference. You remember, the Canadian man with the sailboat? We're planning the Mediterranean leg of the second chapter Courage Mediterranean Adventure Tour. Listen to yourself, Sandra said with a laugh. 2 years ago, you were asking permission to leave Riverside, and now you're casually mentioning international travel with gentlemen friends and cultural events in multiple languages. Do you even remember the woman who was afraid her children wouldn't approve of her moving to a senior community? I did remember her, that woman who'd measured every decision against other people's expectations. But she felt like someone I'd known long ago, not someone I'd been. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been built through dozens of small choices to prioritize my own joy. Hundreds of moments when I'd chosen growth over safety. Thousands of daily decisions to trust my own judgment over others' fears. The doorbell rang. A delivery from my favorite local florist. Not from my children, though they'd all sent flowers too, but from the second chapter Courage community. The card read, From your adventure family worldwide, thank you for giving us permission to choose ourselves. Happy birthday to our fearless leader. Fearless leader. The phrase would have made me laugh 2 years ago. The anxious woman who'd crafted that careful text message about finding a new place, who'd spent days agonizing over how to ask her adult children for their input on her living situation. She hadn't felt fearless. But maybe fearlessness wasn't about the absence of fear. Maybe it was about acting in spite of it. My laptop chimed with a video call request. The second chapter Courage weekly check-in, a tradition that had evolved organically as community members from different time zones found ways to stay connected. Today's call included Patricia from Wisconsin, calling from a national park in Utah, Margaret from London, checking in from her Tuscan village, James from his marina in Barcelona, and 12 others from locations as diverse as Costa Rica, Portugal, and New Zealand. Ruth, you have to settle a debate, Patricia said, grinning from what looked like a spectacular red rock formation. Margaret says you're planning to write a memoir, but James thinks you're too busy living your life to write about it. Which is it? The memoir was something I'd been considering. 3 publishers had approached me, and Dr. Foster kept insisting that a book would reach people our online community couldn't. But every time I sat down to write about the past, I found myself distracted by planning the future. I think, I said slowly, that I'm not ready to write my memoir because I'm not ready for my story to be over. Ask me again in 10 years.
The laughter that followed was warm and understanding. These people, scattered across 3 continents, had become family in ways that had nothing to do with blood or obligation, and everything to do with shared values and mutual support. We celebrated each other's adventures, offered practical advice for navigating bureaucracy and loneliness, and most importantly, reminded each other that choosing yourself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. After the call ended, I spent the afternoon working on something that had become unexpectedly meaningful to me, responding to messages from people who'd found the second chapter Courage community and were contemplating their own dramatic life changes. Today's inbox included a 64-year-old teacher from Ohio who wanted to spend her retirement teaching English in Vietnam, a 70-year-old widower from Scotland who was considering selling everything to travel full-time in a converted bus, and a 72-year-old grandmother from Australia whose family was trying to talk her out of moving to a beach town because it was too far from family. Each message was a variation on the same theme. People who discovered that their family's love often came with conditions, and who were trying to decide whether to honor those conditions or honor themselves. My response was always some version of the same message. You can't love someone else fully until you learn to love yourself enough to choose your own happiness. That evening at dinner with my Dubai book club, 8 women from 6 different countries, all of whom had made dramatic life changes after age 60, I found myself thinking about equilibrium. Not the static kind where everything stays the same, but the dynamic kind where balance is maintained through constant adjustment and growth. My relationship with my children had found its own dynamic equilibrium. They'd stopped trying to control my choices, and I'd stopped needing their approval. The result wasn't distance or estrangement, it was something closer to genuine friendship. When Caleb called, it was because he wanted to hear about my adventures, not because he felt obligated to check on me. When Jasmine visited, she came as an adult woman interested in experiencing Dubai through my eyes, not as a worried daughter conducting a wellness inspection. When Nora and I talked, we discussed books and politics and travel plans, not just family logistics and medical appointments. The irony wasn't lost on me. By refusing to remain the predictable, unchanging center of their universe, I'd become someone they actually wanted to spend time with.
As I walked home through the warm Dubai evening, past cafes full of people speaking a dozen different languages, past art galleries and cultural centers, and the mosque where the call to evening prayers created a soundtrack that had somehow become as familiar as Virginia Birdsong once was, I thought about the woman who'd sent that text message 2 years ago. She'd asked for help finding a new place to live. What she'd found instead was a new way to live, with intention, with courage, with the radical notion that her own happiness mattered as much as anyone else's comfort. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was brief. Mrs. Hartley, I'm 68 years old and my family thinks I'm crazy for wanting to sell my house and move to Portugal. I read your story and wanted to ask, was it worth it? I stopped walking and typed my response. It was worth everything, and so are you. Above me, the Dubai skyline stretched toward stars that were the same ones visible from Virginia, but somehow looked different when viewed from a life you'd chosen for yourself. In the distance, I could hear the sounds of the city settling into evening, conversations in multiple languages, music from restaurants and cafes, the gentle splash of water against the marina walls. I was exactly where I belonged, not because it was where I'd always been, but because it was where I'd chosen to be. The difference I'd learned was everything. Tomorrow, I would wake up as a 76-year-old woman living her best life in a city that still surprised her daily. I would answer more messages from people finding their courage, continue building a community that proved aging could mean expanding rather than contracting, and make plans for adventures I hadn't even imagined yet. But tonight, I was simply grateful. Grateful for the courage that had carried me through that first terrifying leap. Grateful for the family I'd been born into and the family I'd chosen.
Grateful for the community that had grown from one woman's refusal to accept limitations others wanted to place on her life. Most of all, I was grateful for the simple, revolutionary act of choosing myself. It had made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.